Scott Slade, host of Atlanta's Morning News on WSB Radio. Welcome to the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk-Young debate series from the studios of Georgia Public Broadcasting. This is the general election debate among candidates for the U.S. Senate. Let's meet the candidates for this debate. They are in alphabetical order. Chase Oliver, a libertarian, is a businessman. Herschel Walker, a Republican, is a businessman and former professional athlete. Mr. Walker has declined to participate and is represented by an empty podium. Raphael Warnock, a Democrat, is the incumbent senator from Georgia. Now let's meet our panelist. Peter Biello is the host for All Things Considered on Georgia Public Broadcasting. Stanley Dunlap covers government and politics for the Georgia Recorder. And Emma Hurt is a politics reporter for Axios Atlanta. For complete rules on today's debate, please visit the Atlanta Press Club website, atlantapressclub.org/debates. Now, to start the debate, each candidate will be asked 2 questions. Candidates have 60 seconds to answer each question. And Emma Hurt, you get the first question to Chase Oliver.
Mr. Oliver, many voters agree that they are fed up with both of the major parties. But yet third-party candidates like yourself still struggle to break through come general elections. Why is that?
Well, I think you have to look at the situation that third-party and independent candidates face here in the state. We don't have taxpayer-funded primaries that provide an excellent media opportunity for our candidates, and so we have to fight harder to break through that static. Now, I want the voters to know that they do have a third choice in this election, and that I'm somebody who is very proud to be representing the people of the state of Georgia. Now, I liken the two-party system to pro wrestling. It's like having 2 people in a ring who are really pretending to fight each other and getting all their fundraising up, and then they go backstage and they laugh about how they earned so much money and they got so much attention. Well, I'm not here to fight a professional wrestling match. I'm here to go to work in Washington, D.C. for the people of Georgia. I don't have any interest in partisan bickering. I owe no allegiance to either party. I only owe allegiance to you, the voter. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Stanley Dunlap, it's your turn to ask a question to Raphael Warnock.
You've made voting rights one of your central themes and priorities for your first 2 years in the Senate, but including staunchly advocating for the John Lewis Act. But those efforts stalled. What would you do? Would you do anything differently this time around, if reelected, to get some meaningful voting rights laws passed?
Well, thank you so very much. It's great to be here. I want to thank the Atlanta Press Club for organizing this event. I think it's important to point out that my opponent, Herschel Walker, is not here. And I think that half of being a senator is showing up. That's half of life. And I have shown up for the people of Georgia time and time again, especially on this issue of voting rights. I believe that a vote is a kind of prayer for the world that we desire for ourselves and for our children. I've worked hard to create a framework so that we can preserve our democracy. So I will not rest until we pass voting rights. I was John Lewis's pastor, and he didn't have any reason to think he could win, but he didn't give up the fight. And if he crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge, we'll have to figure out how to get through whatever bridge we need to, procedural or otherwise, until we get voting rights secured for every Georgian. And I won't fight until that happens. I won't finish until that happens.
Thank you. Peter Biello, your question for Chase Oliver.
Mr. Oliver, the Department of Veterans Affairs is one of the largest bureaucracies in the federal government. Several VA secretaries have advocated for both the modernization of the VA and for the preparation of the growth in the population of veterans, particularly in the South. If you are elected to the Senate, what specific changes would you support to help the VA both modernize and prepare for the growth of the population of veterans?
Thank you for the question. I think one thing we can do for our veterans in reforming the VA is allow veterans to go outside of the traditional VA system and use money so they can go to regular hospitals. In speaking with veterans, they can tell you that the most broken thing involved when they come back from war is the VA system, and we need to do better by our veterans. And you mentioned that we're going to have more and more veterans. One of the reasons I became involved in politics is because my generation was the generation that was sent to fight wars for the last 20 years, and those veterans are coming home with a lot of injuries. And what we need is we need a foreign policy that's more focused on peace and less focused on becoming the world's police and involving ourselves in the Middle East and things like this. The war in Iraq produced many veterans who are coming home with a lot of injuries, and my generation are the people who are going to suffer from that. And there's scars that are seen and unseen. So yeah, I'm committed to helping veterans, and the best way to do that is to allow them to get the health care they want and not be stuck in a broken VA hospital system. So free it up and let them go to the hospital that's nearest to them. Thank you.
And Emma, you get the final question in this round for Raphael Warnock.
Senator Warnock, you've been vocal about your support for student debt relief. The Department of Education estimates President Biden's plan to do so will cost an estimated $380 billion. What do you say to those who are protesting this cost, especially those who have been able to pay off their loans or those who weren't even able to go to college?
Well, you know, I'm the first college graduate in my family, and I wouldn't be standing here were it not for Pell Grants and low-interest student loans. I paid off my loans. But as I move across this state, I'm encountering folks who, 30 years after I finished school, are finding it harder and harder. We've seen so many bad actors in that space. And too many of our kids have a mortgage before they have a mortgage. And we're not just talking about kids in who finish four-year schools. We're talking about vocational school. We're talking about technical college. Herschel Walker gave a nonsensical answer the other night. He basically offered a proposal that would bankrupt the university schools in this state. And it's one more reason why he's not ready to represent the people of Georgia. I know that without student loans, I wouldn't be standing here. We need to reform the system so that we get control over the costs. But I will show up every single time for the young people in this state.
Thank you. That concludes the first round of the debate. For the second round, the candidates will question each other. Each candidate will have 30 seconds to ask the question, 60 seconds to respond, and the candidate who asked the question will have 30 seconds for a rebuttal. Each candidate will ask two questions and may pose one question to Herschel Walker, who's represented by an empty podium. By random selection, Raphael Warnock, you may ask the first question to Chase Oliver.
Well, Chase Oliver, thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for showing up. And I understand that you're very frustrated with the two-party system. And I can tell you after being in the Senate for nearly 2 years, I share some of the frustration over the divisiveness, and I've tried to overcome that. I'm listed as the 18th most bipartisan senator in the Senate. I'd like to know from you what you think I could bring to Washington to overcome some of this unnecessary division in order to get things done for the people of Georgia.
Well, thank you for the question, and you are right. I am very frustrated with the partisanship that goes on in Washington, D.C. And the truth is you can be the 18th most bipartisan senator that we got there, but the fact is even the most bipartisan of senators isn't really doing a lot of work across the aisle. And the fact is this is because there's this hyper-partisanship that we have. Nothing is getting done. There are big issues that are facing the voters here in Georgia, things like immigration reform, things like justice reform, and this is going to require somebody to step outside of their partisan circle and sit down with everybody regardless of their political affiliation. And I just don't see that coming from Republicans or Democrats. They're more concerned with speaking to their base, speaking to their constituents than getting the work done. So really what we need is somebody like myself who's going to sit down and owe no allegiance to either party, owe no allegiance to Chuck Schumer or Mitch McConnell, and actually get work done for the people of Georgia regardless of who they have to work with and if they have an R or a D next to their name. That's what we need to do.
And 30 seconds to you, Senator Warnock.
Listen, I work for the people of Georgia, and I think I've demonstrated that time and time again. I worked with Ted Cruz to get I-14 named a priority corridor so we could revitalize these sections of our state, connect our military bases. I worked with the Republican senator from Alabama to help Georgia farmers get their products to market, overcome trade barriers. I worked with the Republican senator from Indiana to deal with dangerous railway crossings. I passed a bipartisan jobs and competition bill, and I will do anything, work with anybody necessary to get good things done for Georgia.
Thank you. Chase Oliver, you get the next question for Raphael Warnock.
So, Senator Warnock, we will be hearing all about the spending bills that you have supported and that you have said yes to while we're suffering from record inflation and a $31 trillion national debt. The CBO themselves said the Inflation Reduction Act wouldn't actually reduce inflation. So my question is are you actually reading the bills, or are you just taking Chuck Schumer's word for it when you vote on these things?
We are in the midst of a response to a record pandemic that created an economic shutdown. And as a result of that, we've seen rising costs. While we're paying rising costs, corporations are seeing record profits, which is why I passed the Inflation Reduction Act. Herschel Walker said that he would not have passed the Inflation Reduction Act. And I want the people of Georgia to think about that as they consider who's ready to represent them in the United States Senate. Two provisions in that act, which I wrote, caps the cost of prescription drugs for seniors, so they don't have to choose between buying medicine and buying groceries. By the way, that provision alone helps to reduce the national debt. We have given Medicare the ability to negotiate the price of prescription drugs. That's a $300 billion cut in our national deficit. Also, it caps the cost of insulin, another provision I wrote. So I think Herschel Walker, if he were here, should tell the people of Georgia why he thinks they should pay for expensive insulin, and pharmaceutical companies should be able to charge us whatever they like.
Mr. Oliver, 30 seconds to you for a rebuttal.
So my answer to that is, I asked if you had read the bill. The bill itself doesn't reduce inflation. So I wouldn't run on, I voted for the Inflation Reduction Act if you're talking about how you've reduced inflation in the United States Senate, because that bill doesn't do it. And the truth is we can talk about insulin and price caps and these things later on in this debate. But the fact is people aren't reading the bills in Washington, D.C. They're getting the bills handed to them by leadership. There's not real debate. There's not real amendments. It's not real legislating. What we have is leadership handing the bills at the end of the day, and you're voting on the next day a 1,000-page bill. You're not reading the bills, and if I'm elected to the United States Senate, we will have somebody who is reading the bills.
Raphael Warnock, you may ask your second question to either Chase Oliver or to Herschel Walker, who's represented by an empty podium. You have 30 seconds for the question.
Well, if Mr. Walker were here, I'd ask him about this disturbing history of violence that we've seen from him. And we're not just talking about one woman, but multiple women. He threatened to kill his ex-wife, put a gun to her head. He's threatened other women. And when asked about that, he really hasn't given account for this kind of violence. And I want to know from him why he thinks he's ready to represent the people of Georgia, and if he's ready to face up to this history of violence as he talks about representing us in the Senate.
And now, if Mr. Walker were here, you have a chance to rebut what he would have said.
Well, one of the things he said in response to this, he suggested that I'm a preacher, that I don't believe in redemption. I preach about redemption every Sunday, and I believe in redemption. And one of the things I've learned about redemption is that you have to confess. You have to acknowledge and be honest about the problem, and he has not done that. And at the end of the day, this race is not about who's been redeemed. This race is about who's ready to represent the people of Georgia in the United States Senate. And by not showing up tonight for the job interview, by giving nonsensical answers, by this history of violence, Herschel Walker shows he's not ready.
Chase Oliver, for your final question, you may also ask Raphael Warnock a question, or Herschel Walker, who's not here.
So I will ask Mr. Walker this question. You appeared on the debate stage with Senator Warnock in Savannah 2 nights ago. I wasn't invited to that debate, though I really did want to participate. So my question is simple. Why do you agree to the only debate that doesn't invite all the candidates?
And Mr. Oliver, what would your rebuttal be to what Mr. Walker might have said?
So I imagined he would say something like, well, I'll debate anytime, anywhere, but the fact is we're right here, and I'm ready to debate him. I was ready to debate him 2 nights ago in Savannah. I'm happy to debate the senator here tonight. If you're going to represent the state of Georgia, you need to be able to show up. And I think Republicans need to know now that there is a candidate who's willing to show up anytime, anywhere. I'll have 5 more debates with you before the election if I need to. But I'm going to stand up for small government, lower taxes, and a platform that relies on trusting you and not letting the government make every decision for you. And Herschel, I guess, was scared to have competition on stage trying to speak that message.
Thank you both. That concludes our second round. For those just joining us, this is the general election debate between candidates for the U.S. Senate. We'll now go back to the panel to ask questions to the candidate of their choice until we run out of time. As a point of moderator privilege, I may also ask questions to the candidates, and I'll determine when a rebuttal is appropriate. Stanley Dunlap, you get the first question in this round.
So we had a controversial right to carry constitutional law that passed in the Georgia State Legislature this year that allowed concealed carry without getting a permit. And then we also had this summer, Congress passed a gun reform law. For Mr. Oliver, and this question is for both, but first for Mr. Oliver, what are your views on the balance between gun owners' constitutional rights and the needs for call for gun reform. And for both of you, what else can be done to address the mass shootings and gun violence in regard to that?
1 minute, beginning of Mr. Oliver.
All right, so I first want to say that I'm a proud gun owner, and I respect the Second Amendment. I think everybody has the right to defend themselves from violence, and if we look at where a lot of the gun control laws in this country come from, it comes from a place of historical oppression and, frankly, racism and bigotry. You know, we have a pastor here from Ebenezer Baptist. There was a previous pastor from Ebenezer Baptist who was denied his right to carry when he wanted to defend himself. I think that's wrong. I think people should have the right to defend themselves if they so choose. Now, how do we address gun violence? The truth is we've always had guns in this country. The way you're not going to address gun violence is to be doing gun confiscation or passing unconstitutional red flag laws that do away with people's due process. The way we address gun violence is we have to address the culture of violence in our society. And that's not something that you can really do with a piece of legislation. That's something we have to come to terms with, and that's something we have to speak to our families, to our friends. But at the end of the day, no, I'm not going to support red flag laws. I'm not going to support gun confiscation. I'm going to stand up for people's right to defend themselves. Because at the end of the day, you know, I'm a member of the Pink Pistols. Armed gays are harder to oppress and they're harder to bash.
And 1 minute to Raphael Warnock for that.
These mass shootings that we keep seeing in our country, this doesn't happen everywhere. Doesn't happen anywhere else, and we have to come to terms with that. Now, I support the Second Amendment, but you can support the Second Amendment and still believe in reasonable gun safety. And I'm proud that for the first time in 30 years, we passed a gun safety law on a bipartisan basis. And I think that if the Senate were more responsive to where the people are on the left and the right, we'd get more done. Most Americans support universal background checks. Why can't we get that done? Because too often, the voices of the people have been strangled out of their own democracy by all of this dark money, which is something I tried to address in the voting law that I kept trying to pass. And I'm going to keep trying to pass because democracy is at stake. And I can only think about how heartbreaking it must have been for those parents in Uvalde and worshipers in California, so many places. But I'm glad we're able to get more done, and I'd like to see us build on that effort.
Thank you. Emma Hurt, it's your turn to ask a question, please.
This is also a question for both candidates. Georgia is the only state in the country with this specific kind of general election runoff structure that affects this race here as well. Do you believe that should change, Senator Warnock?
A minute, please.
Here's what we know is that early voting begins tomorrow. And at the end of the day, either I'm going to be in this seat or Herschel Walker, who hadn't shown up tonight, is going to be in this seat. That is the reality. And so I want to encourage everybody to show up for early voting. It begins tomorrow, goes through November the 4th. And in the meantime, I'm going to keep doing everything I can to help the people get their voices back in their own democracy.
So is that a yes or a no on the runoff structure question?
Look, I have to accept the rules as we currently have them, and I'm willing to have that conversation on the other side of this election. But right now, there's so many things at stake that I'm really focused on that.
Mr. Oliver, same question to you, 1 minute.
So yeah, I would reform the system, but what I wouldn't do is do away with runoffs. I believe you have to have over 50% of the voter support to really represent us. You know, you shouldn't be getting under 50% and going into office. So I do support the structure we have, but we can actually improve upon that. We can do instant runoff voting, ranked choice voting. So that way you go into the booth and you pick your first, second, and choice on down. And then we don't have to wait weeks and additional millions of dollars of media ad buys and YouTube ads that we all don't want to listen to anymore. We can actually just have the runoff right there on Election Day. That's a real reform that would save the taxpayers millions of dollars, make sure that our democracy stays responsive to the people and represents the people. That's what we can do to improve our democratic process. What we don't want to do is we don't want to do away with, we don't want to have plurality voting, because if you're under 50% support, you shouldn't be getting sent somewhere to represent 100% of the people. So what we need to do is we need to reform to ranked choice voting, instant runoff voting, and I would support that every day of the week.
This is pretty important. Let's do 15 seconds to each of you, because I think Senator Warnock has his hand up for. You had a point?
Well, I just want to say that the people of Georgia can avoid a runoff. They can show up starting tomorrow for early voting. I think most of us don't want to see a runoff. There's bipartisan agreement on that point. And so I'd like to see people show up beginning tomorrow.
Mr. Oliver, 15 more to you.
I think voters deserve a chance to, have their voices heard, and they shouldn't have to be lumped into one box or the other. They shouldn't have to be shamed into voting into two parties. And most of the people who vote represent themselves as independent, so it's important that we have voices that are independent of the two parties on stage. And instant runoff voting prevents a runoff every time. So if we pass it, we won't have one.
Thank you both. Peter Biello, it's your turn to ask a question.
Thank you. This question goes to both of you, but first to you, Mr. Oliver. Social Security payments are set to rise to keep pace with inflation, and that has some people worried about the solvency of Social Security. So if you are sworn in as a senator in January, would you take steps to protect Social Security? And if so, what would those steps be?
60 seconds.
Well, first, my parents, they live on a fixed income. So I know the struggle of living on a fixed income. There are people right now who depend on Social Security for their livelihood. I don't think we should take Social Security away from them. But for people my age who are never going to see Social Security payments, we're paying into it, but that system will be insolvent by the time I retire, by the time our kids retire. They should have the option to step out of the Social Security system and put their money into a private market if they so choose. If the market is working better, which it often does, people will have better retirements. And you can make that choice. You can choose to stay in the Social Security system if you want. You're not going to get that money when you retire because the system will be insolvent. But I think people should have the choice to where they put their money for their retirement. You should control your retirement, not the United States government.
Senator Warnock, to you.
I will protect Social Security. And there are folks who want to privatize it. And Social Security can be preserved. We can make sure that it's there for the generation that needs it now, for my generation, the generation after that. And a vote for Herschel Walker will further advance the agenda of those who want to rob Social Security. It's one of the reasons why I passed the Inflation Reduction Act. We've got to protect our seniors. And one of the things we did in that law was we finally gave Medicare the ability to negotiate the price of prescription drugs. And I think about that because I ran into a woman at a hearing I had named Gretchen Spring, and she and her husband literally maxed out their credit cards, paying for medicine in the evening of their lives. And we finally gave Medicare the ability to negotiate prescription drugs, and Herschel Walker says he would vote against it. So I will protect our seniors, I will protect their Social Security, I will protect their Medicare.
That's your time. Thank you.
Senator Warnock, if I may follow up with you, are there specific steps that you would take if you were given a full term in the Senate?
We can ask for corporations to pay their fair share. Here we were giving Medicare the ability to negotiate. And apparently Herschel Walker thinks that's a bad idea. He thinks they should be able to charge us anything they want. We don't suffer from a poverty of resources. We suffer from a poverty of moral imagination.
Mr. Oliver, some follow-up time for you then on that.
You can't charge any price you want for drugs. What you can charge is the price that people are willing to pay for it. And right now, drugs are being subsidized. Big Pharma is subsidized to the tune of billions of dollars a year by our government. And the truth is they should compete in any marketplace like anyone else. Now, I am one to say that I don't want expansion of government into our health care. When Obamacare got passed, we saw what that happened. Prices rose and overall care diminished. Even if you got a plan, your deductible was so high that it basically was useless. So no, I don't support expanding government into more healthcare. We need to bring market forces into healthcare that are going to lower the prices. Arbitrary price caps, like the senator talks about with insulin, that's not going to solve the problem. And I'm happy to talk about what will solve that problem and help people who are suffering from diabetes afford their insulin.
Thank you both. Stanley Dunlap, next question to you, please.
My question is for both of the candidates. First, Mr. Oliver, you mentioned one of your priorities is immigration and fixing the immigration system. And then we've seen issues arise from ICE detention centers to how migrants are handled when they arrive in the country. And what would you do as a libertarian to kind of bridge that gap? Because it's a pretty wide divide on how they handle that in Congress. And then also for Senator Warnock, do you believe like there's been enough done? There's been some criticism from organizations like the ACLU over President Biden's handling of that. Do you feel like, what are one or two things you'd like to see done or accomplished in the next term?
Beginning with Mr. Oliver, 60 seconds.
We've been talking about bipartisan immigration reform for the last 20 years, and it hasn't gotten done because of hyperpartisanship. We need somebody in the United States Senate that's willing to sit down at the table with Republicans and Democrats and fix this broken system. We need the immigration system to be more efficient, less costly, and more responsive to people. And we don't need to be putting people in cages, especially those who are seeking asylum. Their claims should be heard and respected. You know, we claim to be the light of liberty unto the world, and if we seek to hold that mantle, we have to fix our broken immigration system. And I'll work with anyone in the United States Senate, regardless of party, to get that done. Again, right now, it is too complicated to work in the system. So we have millions of people who step out of that system and come here without documentation. The way to fix that is to fix the system and to make it easier for people to enter into it. We don't demonize people for coming here and wanting to work and put down their roots, because that's what my family did when they came here generations and generations ago. Almost everybody came here from somewhere else. And it's about time we respect the immigrant story, the immigrant journey, and fix our broken immigration system for them and for us.
Senator Warnock?
You know, I've spent time in recent days with dreamers, and they'd like to see us fix our immigration system. This is the only country many of them have known. I spent some time with business leaders in recent days, and business leaders across this state and farmers are calling on us to fix the immigration system. Here is the deal. We have solutions to fix this. It's politics that gets in the way, because we have a class of politicians who are so focused on the next generation, the next election, that they're not thinking about the next generation. I've proven that I know how to work across the aisle. I'm committed to doing that. Maybe it has something to do with being a pastor. I'm used to working with whoever comes in the door. And so we've got to get comprehensive immigration reform done in our country. It's good not only for immigrants, it's good for business. It's good for our economy. We can do that and secure our border at the same time. And it's past time folks stop demagoguing this issue and work on the problem. That's something that I'm focused on. That's something that I will stay focused on until we get it done.
Thank you. Emma Hurt, next question to you, please.
Senator Warnock, on Friday in the debate, you said that reports that a foundation affiliated with your church, Ebenezer Baptist Church, attempted to evict low-income tenants during the pandemic from a housing complex are not true. But those are reports based on court filings against those tenants, and the state of Georgia is now also investigating that foundation for not properly registering as a charity. So how do you reconcile all those documents with the denial of the story?
Well, I'm actually glad you asked that question, because this is one more example of Herschel Walker and his allies lying. First of all, there were no evictions, and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution reported that. And my church has no direct involvement in the day-to-day operations of that apartment building. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution reported that. What you're dealing with right now is a desperate candidate who's not here tonight, and he's resorted to trying to sully the name of Dr. King's church, John Lewis's church, for short-term political gain. It didn't work the last time. They attacked my church the last time. It didn't work. My church is a Matthew 25 church. We believe that when you show up for the least of these, you're doing God's work in the world. We won't be distracted. We'll keep doing that work. And I'll keep showing up for the people of Georgia, bringing at a policy level the work that we've been doing for years at the local level.
Did you get your question answered, Don?
Just to be clear, so you're saying while there might have been attempts to evict, nobody was actually evicted?
There have been no evictions. Full stop.
Peter Briello, it's your turn to ask a question.
This question goes to Mr. Oliver. President Biden has called climate change an existential threat. Daily high temperatures are getting higher, polar ice caps are melting, storms are becoming more powerful, sea levels are rising. If you are Georgia's senator next year, what legislation would you introduce to not just improve our environment, but limit and bring down carbon emissions, which have been tied to climate change?
Well, you know, I think it sounds great to say that we could just magically pass a bill and stop using less carbon and lower the carbon output. But that's just not the way it's going to work. And when you rely on government to solve all the problems, that's when you're going to get stifled innovation. If government were designing phone chargers, we'd be using USB chargers from 10 years ago, and we would never, ever try to innovate. And so the truth is we need to actually get out of the way and let the marketplace innovate. There are many, many people who have a vested interest in providing the best products and the new products that are going to provide our green future. And what we need to do is get out of the way of that. Quit over-regulating green technology, get out of the way, and yeah, we can fight climate change, but that doesn't require massive government action, doesn't require carbon caps and all new government programs. It just requires us to buckle down, have that American innovation that we are known for, and we are going to develop the technologies that will power us into the future, not using carbon-based fuels. In the meantime, Government doesn't really have a role in deciding what technology is going to be developing in the next few years.
Senator Warnock, I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
I'm very focused on this issue. You know, in the church, we call it creation care. We ought to be kind to the earth. It's the only place that we have, and we have to make sure that we have a planet to leave for our children. And it's the reason why I've been focused on this issue. I'm glad that we passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which represents record investment in green energy, in a green energy future. In addition to that, I've been very involved leading the way with the creation of electric vehicle infrastructure right here in the state of Georgia. One of the first things I did when I became a senator was I worked very hard to keep this company open, LG, in Georgia, because it was involved in a trade dispute. I wanted to make sure that we kept that infrastructure here where they make batteries for cars. I'm glad that I've worked with the Kia and Hyundai folks here in Georgia, and down in Bryan County, we're getting ready to open up a company that will hire 9,000 people, and they will be creating electric vehicles there. I've also led the way with creating the sustainable aviation fuel. There's so many things that we need to do, and I'm very focused on that work.
Did you have a follow-up?
I did have a follow-up for Mr. Oliver. So it seems like you're primarily interested in market-driven forces. Can you name an example of an innovation that brought down carbon emissions that had no government incentive tied to it?
Well, I think it's very hard to get that because of the big government, world we live in. Every major company is trying to reach out for every subsidy and giveaway they can. But the truth is we need to bring market competition back to it. We don't just need to be having a scramble for who can get the next federal dollars. We need to have people who are innovating the next technologies. Now, what technologies do we have? I imagine Tesla, Elon Musk would have developed a car with or without subsidies. Now, he'll take the subsidies because anybody will take free money, but it's your money, it's your taxpayer money that's going in Elon Musk's pocket. He's a billionaire. He can afford to develop his own electric vehicles without taking taxpayer money for it and upping our debt and making our debt crisis even worse. We don't need to be printing money out of thin air to give money to green billionaires to develop new technology. They'll do that on their own.
Stanley Dunlap, the next question to you, please.
And this is for Mr. Oliver. You've mentioned that you'd be happy for a runoff because that would show that there's dissatisfaction with both of the Republican and Democrat candidates. If that happened with the two other candidates, would you then support one or the other during the lead up to the runoff? And if so, why?
So it's not my job to endorse one or the other of the candidates, considering I don't support the two-party structure. I support voting outside of the two-party system. But what I am going to do is if there isn't a runoff and I'm not in it, I will allow the other two candidates a chance to attend a forum. I'll moderate it, and we can talk about the issues that I think are important to the libertarian and independent voters. Now, I don't know if Herschel will show up to that forum, and I don't know if Senator Warnock would either, but I'm going to provide them the opportunity to speak to those voters who feel dissatisfied with the two-party system and give them a chance to put their support behind either candidate in the runoff. But again, it's not my job to make your decision for you who you should support in any kind of theoretical runoff. And really the best case support or the best case scenario runoff would be one where we have one candidate who is not part of the broken two-party system. And you have that ability to do that, Georgia. You can vote outside of the system and make a runoff that's historic and make a runoff that is actually worthy of the voters instead of this broken two-party system that we continue to see over and over again.
Mr. Oliver mentioned you, Senator Warnock. You have 30 seconds to respond if you'd like.
Early voting begins tomorrow. And at the end of the day, either Herschel Walker will sit in this seat or I will sit in this seat. One of the things I've learned from being a pastor is that in order to serve the people, you have to spend time with the people. And I guess the reason why I've been so focused on issues like Medicaid expansion is I've spent so much time at people's bedsides. And I've focused on the insulin issue because I've been there when diabetes has gotten out of control. I'm a pastor in the Senate. I'm deeply honored to serve the people of Georgia, and I'd be deeply honored to serve you for 6 more years.
That's our time. Emma Hurt, your turn to ask a question, please.
Senator Warnock, you earlier just tonight and your campaign have attacked Herschel Walker for his past domestic violence allegations by his ex-wife and by other women, some of which he has denied, some of which he hasn't. His campaign has attacked you as well for your ex-wife's allegation that you ran over her foot with a car, which you've denied, as well as for your child custody battle. Our campaign's getting too personal, and what would you do about it?
Well, first of all, let me be very clear. I have never been violent to anybody for any reason. And I have spent my entire life as a citizen, as a pastor of Dr. King's church, steeped in the philosophy of nonviolence, as a senator, fighting against nonviolence. My opponent, on the other hand, has a well-documented history of violence, and he hasn't come clean about it. He's blaming me for his own history, saying I don't believe in redemption. I believe in redemption. I preach about it. But it's hard to be redeemed if you're not willing to come clean about the basic facts of your life. And at the end of the day, again, this race is not about who's been redeemed. It's about who's ready. And I think Mr. Walker has shown time and time again that he's not ready to represent the people of Georgia.
Thank you. I have a question for the both of you, beginning with Mr. Oliver. You said one of your highest priorities is penal reform in America. What would that look like?
Well, I believe that we need true justice reform at every level. And that is not just in the jails. That is from the police to the courts to the prosecutors. But yes, we need reform in our prisons. I've heard so many stories about people who feel like they have been abused. And what we're doing right now is we incarcerate people many times for basic drug possession. And they go in, they don't get any care for their addiction. And then what they do is they get out, they're re-traumatized, and they go right back to behaviors that harmed them in the first place. We need real harm reduction, and we need real work in our prisons to reduce recidivism. But beyond that, we need to fix other facets of our justice system. We need to do away with mandatory minimums, which take control out of the hand of judges and just create arbitrary prison terms for people that ruin their lives. We need to do away with qualified immunity for federal and law enforcement so that law enforcement can be held accountable in a court of law just like any of us. And I think at every level, we need real justice reform. That includes ending the death penalty. I'm opposed to capital punishment because too often we put people to death who were later found to have been innocent. So yeah, we need real reforms to our prison, our justice system at every step of the way, and that's something that I fought for. I've gotten tear gas in the streets and seen the National Guard rolling down the road while I protest for justice reform.
Senator Warnock, the same question to you, please. Penal reform in America, some thoughts on that?
It's something I've worked on for years, long before coming to the Senate. The United States of America is about 4 or 5% of the world's population. We warehouse 25% of the world's prisoners. Many of them are there for nonviolent, drug-related offenses. I was glad to see some movement on this front in the space around cannabis, and I think we need some necessary reform. We're warehousing a lot of folks for nonviolent drug-related offenses. It's something I've seen up close. I've used the ministry of my church to address it, and now that I'm in the Senate, I'm focused on bringing the kind of reform that we need. And part of it is opportunity. Look, I grew up in public housing, and I think that part of the answer to a lot of these things is hope. You got to give people hope. You got to help people at least have the ladders to create their own best life. I know what that did for me, and I try to extend that opportunity to other people.
Thank you both. Peter Biello, next question to you, please.
Sure. Senator Warnock, President Biden's popularity in Georgia is underwater. Inflation is still rising. Why should voters trust Democrats when it comes to the handling of the economy?
Well, I'm asking the people of Georgia to trust me. Look, I didn't look to get into politics. And it's because I'm not in love with politics, I'm in love with change. I've spent the last 17 years serving as senior pastor of the Ebenezer Baptist Church, and I return to my church every Sunday so that I stay connected to the people. And it is seeing the pain there. Folks who are paying record prices while corporations are enjoying record profits. That's what drives me to go back to the Senate every week to try to get things done for hardworking people. So we passed the Inflation Reduction Act, and I've got more that I'd like to see us get done. I would have gotten an insulin cap for folks who have private insurance if I weren't blocked by craven politicians who think they work for pharmaceutical companies. Well, I don't work for Big Pharma. I don't work for big oil and gas. And I don't work for some party. I work for the people of Georgia.
Stanley Dunlap, next question to you, please.
We could see kind of the balance of power potentially change in this election. If that happens, and it's already a pretty tense and contentious between the Republican and Democrat lawmakers. What, if there is even more of a further divide, realistically, how much can get accomplished over the next 4 years as we see kind of things could continue to get worse, at least between the two parties, maybe not working together as often? And that's for both candidates.
Listen, the problem with our politics right now is that it's too much about the politicians. They're thinking more about themselves and they're thinking about the people who hired them to show up for them in the first place. I think I've demonstrated that I know how to work across the aisle, that mine is an extended hand. I did an amendment with Ted Cruz. I disagree with him on almost everything. But when I saw an opportunity to build out an interstate that would connect our military bases and revitalize communities in this state that are suffering, I joined with him to do that. And I think that in a deeper sense, there is a road that runs through our humanity that is bigger than politics, bigger than partisan bickering, bigger than racism, and bigger than the regional differences that would separate us. I still believe in the American covenant. I'm not about to give up on it. E pluribus unum, out of many one. And I'm going to keep fighting for it. If Martin Luther King Jr. didn't give up and John Lewis, who was my parishioner, didn't give up, who am I to give up?
That's our time. Mr. Oliver, the question to you, please.
So, you mentioned bipartisanship, and you also talked about, can we trust Democrats with the spending and the Inflation Reduction Act? The truth is we can't really trust the Democrats or the Republicans who are currently in leadership right now to do that, because my entire adult life, they've been deficit spending like it's going out of style. The last time we had a balanced budget was in the 1990s. That was also the last time we had a real explosion in the middle class and broad prosperity growth in this country. Those two things are not unrelated. And the fact is the only thing Democrats and Republicans can agree on is how to spend your money out of thin air and devalue our dollar. He has said several times that I've passed the Inflation Reduction Act. It doesn't reduce inflation. That's not what the bill does. I want to reduce inflation because the costs of groceries, the costs of rent are going up every single month, and people are feeling it. It's a real thing. I go to work every day, and I have to make my I have to balance my budget. Every Georgia household has to balance their budget. Why can't we insist upon a government that balances its budget? Why is that the radical idea, not the rational idea? Why can't we get back to a rational idea that Democrats and Republicans agreed on 20 years ago? Balance the budget so we have more prosperity and a growing middle class. That's what we need, not more spending.
Senator Warnock, 30 seconds to you to respond if you'd like it.
Well, as I'm looking at these rising costs, part of what I've tried to do is to hold big pharmaceutical companies accountable, ocean carriers accountable, and I've tried to deal with these issues in our supply chain. I'm proud of the fact that we passed on a bipartisan basis the Jobs and Competition Bill. As you look at the rising costs of your automobiles, part of that is because of microchips. We invented the microchip. We used to make 40% of them. Now we make only 12%. And so here we are with a company in West Point, Georgia, shutting down, not because it didn't have enough customers, but because it didn't have enough chips.
That's our time. Mr. Oliver, would you like a response to that? I'll give you another 30 seconds.
Yeah, let's talk about the supply chain. Let's talk about drug prices. A price cap, which is what you offered for insulin, that is not going to solve the problem. That's just going to lead to market shortages like all price caps eventually do. The way to make insulin less expensive is get rid of patent evergreening that makes it expensive in the first place. Allow customers to buy from outside of the country where insulin is less expensive, pushing the price down using market forces. And at the end of the day, we need to make it easier to develop new medicines and new technologies by reforming the FDA and doing away with a massive amount of red tape that increases the cost of these drugs. We can lower the cost of insulin without arbitrary price caps, which will lead to shortages.
Thank you. We'll need to move on. Emma Hurt, next question to you, please.
This question is for Mr. Oliver. You are running as Georgia's first openly gay Senate candidate. What protections for the LGBTQ community do you think Congress needs to take up?
Well, I've said in the past that I support the Equality Act, but at the end of the day, what we need to be doing is stop demonizing LGBTQ people. I hear all day long from folks like Herschel Walker and about how terrible LGBTQ people are, about how they're destroying our children. Well, the fact is I was a gay child one time, and I was thankful that I had supportive teachers and supportive people in my life that could help me as I was growing up. And I don't want to do away with that. But the reality is we have far too many people looking to demonize LGBTQ people, and I am not one who's going to stand for that. Of course, like I said, I support the Equality Act, But the best way for me to be a good representative as an LGBTQ person is to get up, do the work, and be like just everybody else, because that's what LGBTQ people are. We just love different people. There's nothing inherently wrong with us, and I think there's something we can be proud of. I was proud to be marching the Pride Parade as the first ever LGBTQ statewide candidate. I was a few cars behind you, sir, but I enjoyed the Pride Parade altogether. And I think the two people on this stage will absolutely stand for LGBTQ people, but I want people to know that you have somebody you can support who knows what it's like to grow up LGBTQ and who knows what it's like to find that support in people in their lives. And we need to be supporting that.
Thank you. Peter Biel, next question to you, please.
This question goes to both of you. I'll start with you, Senator Warnock. COVID-19 is still with us, and as monkeypox has shown us, new viruses can pop up at any time. If you are elected to a full term, what would you do in your next term to make sure that we as a country are prepared for the next pandemic?
Sure. Look, part of what we need to do is make sure we shore up and strengthen the healthcare system for all times. We've seen in this state 10 hospitals close in 10 years. And then a couple of weeks ago, we got the terrible news that the Atlanta Medical Center is going to close. I have remained focused on trying to strengthen our healthcare system in general, because in the work we do around vaccines, all of that depends on our ability to deal with these kinds of chronic diseases and health in general. Georgia needs to expand Medicaid, and that is a state issue, and it's got to be addressed at that level. But I've done everything I can at the federal level, and I'll keep doing more to further incentivize our state to expand Medicaid. We've got 600,000 people in the coverage gap. Most of them are the working poor. And when a pandemic comes on top of that, people already not getting basic health care, it makes it that much worse, which is why I'm going to keep fighting for health care.
Thank you. Mr. Oliver, the question to you.
Sorry?
60 seconds.
Oh, so yeah, I have struggled during the pandemic, and the thing that we need to do is, one of the things that was the biggest crisis of the pandemic was the fact that we closed down businesses and schools. Those are the unseen victims of the pandemic. We can see people who get sick from COVID-19 and die, but what we don't know is how many businesses have closed and are never going to open again. How many kids lost months and months of vital time to be educated. We need to have a different approach to our pandemic than just saying, we're just going to shut everything down and that's what we're going to do. And that's what happened in this pandemic from the very beginning. I am not somebody who thinks we need to arbitrarily lock down the state. I think we can, you can go to your doctor, take your doctor's advice. That's the most important thing. Don't take politicians' advice for your health care. Take your doctor's advice for your health care. Those are the people who are going to have the real educated answers for you and who are interested in actually providing you health care and not just talking points that are going to make you feel good or that don't really make a lot of sense. I go to my doctor for my health care.
We've got about 4 minutes left in this round, and something to add, Senator Warnock.
I just want to quickly say that I wrote the Medicaid Saves Lives Act. Time and time again, I've tried to strengthen our healthcare system. Herschel Walker doesn't believe we should expand Medicaid. And he should explain to the 600,000 Georgians who are in the Medicaid gap, most of whom are the working poor. These are hardworking families. He said the other night that well-bodied people already have health care. And yet he says he's ready to be a senator. Why does he not know that the folks who are in the gap, a lot of them work every single day? He should tell them that.
That's not. And Mr. Oliver, a final word from you on expansion of Medicaid in the state of Georgia. I'd like your position on that. 30 seconds, please.
Well, I'm against expansion of Medicaid in the state because I think the further government gets entrenched in the healthcare marketplace, the faster you're going to see costs rising faster than the rate of inflation. Education and healthcare are the two areas where government involves itself in the most and where prices rise faster than inflation the most. So what we need to be doing is finding market forces for healthcare to lower the costs. Now, you can have the Medicare program, but expanding it and spending more and more money is going to throw good money after bad eventually. Single-payer healthcare programs do not work the best. And you can look at that just by cancer survival rates in our allies that do have single-payer healthcare. It's a lot lower than what we have here in the U.S.
Thank you. Stanley Dunlap, next question to you, please.
And this is for both. First, with the Senator Warnock, you're 2 years in as a senator. Sure, sometimes it's maybe felt longer than that with everything that's been going on. But what would you give today's, as yourself, advice would you give Senator Warnock, who was entering office 2 years ago? And also for Mr. Oliver, You'd be a third-party candidate and new to Congress if elected. How would you kind of ingratiate yourself in there and hopefully get some things accomplished and develop relationships?
60 seconds, Mr. Warnock.
Well, let me say that this is not easy work, and any work that's worth doing is not easy. My dad said if someone hires you to do a job, do the job they hired you to do. And this may sound corny, but really, I wake up and I pinch myself every few days because I'm deeply honored that the people of Georgia have given me a chance to represent them in the Senate. I see that as a sacred trust when your neighbors say, we want you to take the concerns of our family and our seniors, our young people with you and put forward public policy that helps us to live our best lives. I wake up every single day thinking about the people of Georgia, and I would tell Raphael Warnock as I was sworn in 2 years ago or nearly 2 years ago to soldier on. And that's what I keep saying to myself every day. Never mind the distractions, the lies, the things that people throw at you. Stay focused on the people who asked you to serve.
Mr. Oliver, same question to you. 60 seconds, please.
So how would I ingratiate myself if I were to be elected, and how would I work with people? Well, the fact is I would be an open book. I'm honest. I tell you exactly how I feel, and I don't hide behind partisan games. I will sit down with anybody, regardless of their party, to do the work that needs to be done. That's really the goal of it. You know, I would love to make friends and colleagues in the Senate, but my job is not to go there to make friends. My job there is to do the work for the people of Georgia. So I want to go to the United States Senate, sit down with anyone, regardless of party, and get the work done on the really big issues that we have been discussing for 20 years or more. Immigration, justice, healthcare, voting rights, all of these things we can work on together, but we have to have somebody who's really willing to sit down in a bipartisan, tripartisan manner and actually get things done. Now, I'm not there to make friends. I'm there to work for the people of Georgia. And my allegiance, if I were to go to the United States Senate, would be to those people and to no one else. So I'm not going to be Chuck Schumer's best friend or Mitch McConnell's best friend, but I'm sure I can find colleagues who are willing to do the work in Washington, D.C. if I'm sent there.
Emma, we have time for one more question and a 1-minute answer. If you wanted to ask it of both, they'll need to be 30 seconds apiece.
This last question is for Senator Warnock. A key tenet of your Republican opponent's campaign is a claim that you voted 96% of the time with President Biden while in office. Have you? And if so, is that a problem?
I have voted to support the people of Georgia. And they're the ones I'm thinking about every single time. And when I've needed to, I've stood up to the Biden administration. I stood up to the Biden administration and said, no, don't close the Savannah Combat Readiness Center. We need that center for our national security. I have worked with Republicans time and time again to get bills done because I work for Georgia. And I'm not going to be distracted about what Herschel Walker says about me. He doesn't tell the truth about himself. He said that he graduated from college. He didn't. He said he was valedictorian of his class. He wasn't. He said he started a business that doesn't even exist. And the other night when I said he pretended to be a police officer, he presented a badge as if that were proof that he really is a police officer. And now he wants us to think that he's a senator. I think the people of Georgia are wise and discerning. And they know that at the end of the day, I know who I work for. I work for them.
Thank you both. And this is all the time we have for questions. Each candidate now will have 60 seconds for a closing statement. Chase Oliver, you get the first closing statement.
Well, first I want to say thank you to the Atlanta Press Club for hosting an inclusive debate where voters have an opportunity to hear from all of the candidates on the ballot, even if all of those candidates decided not to show up. My name is Chase Oliver, and I want to go to D.C. to work for the people of Georgia. I'm not interested in partisan games because they won't solve the issues that matter to Georgia voters, like rising costs of groceries and the rent. I want to take power out of the hands of government and return it to each and every one of you, because that's where it resides. I want you to be able to start a small business. I want you to have control over your own body. And I want you to be able to live your life as your authentic self in peace. I'm not going to participate in partisan fights and bickering. My job is to work. I owe allegiance to no party. Instead, I owe the allegiance to the people of Georgia, the U.S. Constitution, and the inherent human rights and liberty of all people. To learn more, visit my website, chaseforgeorgia.com. Send me to the U.S. Senate, and I'm going to get to work for you. Thank you.
Raphael Warnock, you get the final closing statement.
Well, I want to thank the Atlanta Press Club for organizing this debate. I thank Mr. Oliver for being here. It's too bad Herschel Walker didn't show up. I think part of being a senator is showing up. And we're applying for a job. This is a job interview. You have to show up for the interview. And I have shown up for the people of Georgia time and time again. And I'm just getting started. My dad used to say, son, if somebody hires you to do a job, do the job they hired you to do. He used to wake me up every morning and told me to put my shoes on. Well, Georgia, my shoes are on. And the issues are serious. The times are urgent. I know the days are difficult, but I still believe that the scripture is right, that the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness overcometh it not. Don't give in into despair. Wake up tomorrow morning. Early voting begins on October 17th. Your vote is your voice. Your voice is your human dignity. Let's get to work for Georgia. I'd be honored to have your vote. Keep the faith.
That concludes our debate. We'd like to remind voters that Election Day is Tuesday, November 8th, and early voting begins October 17th. Our thanks to the candidates, to our panel of journalists. We'd also like to thank the Atlanta Press Club for arranging today's debate. And for more information about the debates they will host this election season, visit atlantapressclub.org/debates. I want to take a moment to recognize the passing of Charlie Loudermilk, who died earlier this year at 95. He understood the importance of civil discourse, no matter one's political beliefs. And because of this commitment, Charlie, a conservative Republican businessman, endowed the Atlanta Press Club debates, naming them the Loudermilk-Young Debate Series in honor of his close friend, former Atlanta Mayor Andrew Young, a progressive Democrat, civil rights leader, and public servant. I'm Scott Slade. Thanks for joining us for the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk-Young Debate Series. Don't forget, the gubernatorial debate is Monday night. Have a great evening.